Well, it's 11 o'clock Eastern time, 10 o'clock Central time, and whatever else time it is, and wherever part of the country or world you are in. So, we're going to get started with our Clarity First conversation, part of the ongoing kind of way we help leaders here at Auxano do this. Let me hit this keynote. We are talking today about 3 ways vision clarity shapes church structure. I'm going to say a quick prayer and we're going to jump right in. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for these leaders that are even now joining us on this Zoom or maybe watching the replay of this sometime in the future. Lord, we just thank you for your love for us. Thank you for the leadership calling you've placed on our life. Lord, I pray you would help us to steward the resources of people, steward the resources of time, steward the resources of finances in a way that glorifies you and leads people to know you. So thank you for this time we get. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, thanks again for being a part of this Clarity First conversation. Everyone kind of jumping in there. We are honored to have Jim Randall on our call today. And I'd like for everybody to just kind of check in from who you are and where you are. So drop your name, city, state in the chat. We're also going to use chat for Q&A. So it'd be great that if questions pop up along the way, we are moderating this call, and we'll look forward to getting to some of the questions down the road in that. Jim, you have been on this Clarity First journey as Senior Lead Navigator, co-founder of Auxano, Chief Engagement Officer for more than 20 years. Talk to me a minute about kind of the importance of vision clarity and staff structure, staff leadership.
Yeah, great seeing you this morning, Brian. Thanks for having me part of this ongoing. Just continue to feel privileged to serve the bride. I tell you, when it comes to Clarity First staffing and structure, we don't have to go far into Scripture, certainly, and begin to see exactly how God kind of reminds us through His Word about this importance. And so I immediately go to the relationship between Moses and Jethro, right? In Exodus, chapter 18, and certainly you see the verse right there where Jethro gives kind of a come to Jesus talk with Moses, and he says, hey, Moses, you're certainly going to wear yourself out. And by the way, not just you, but you and all these people, because this task of taking the children out of captivity, right, to the promised land, you can't do this alone.
Right.
And he basically says, hey man, you got to lead, and a part of leading is you got to create a structure that's worthy of ministry. And so, bam, right there in our face, we immediately get this challenge that as leaders, we've got to figure out the structure that's needed for us to be able to achieve what God wants us to be able to achieve.
Yeah. I love that, Jim, and it's one of those kind of shaping ministry shaping passages for me too. As we get into this conversation, I wonder, just kind of for fun, what was the structure of the first church staff you were on? Do you remember it? Because I remember mine vividly. Do you remember the structure of the first church staff you were on?
Yeah, my first church staff began with the day I was called to that church. When I stood up in front of that church to be called, on the same day that I stood up to be called, the pastor announced his retirement, unbeknownst to me. I stepped into a hierarchical kind of model of leadership. And here's what's interesting. With an autocratic leader who became the leader during that interim time. And so maybe even borderline dictatorial, but we'll run with autocratic at this point. So yeah, it was very vivid, and it was a shock to my system, no question.
As you know, I stepped into ministry from architecture. So when I surrendered to the call and kind of went to seminary and joined my first church staff, I remember I joined a team, which I thought this was cool. I'd never seen it before. It was 4 pastors, and they called themselves a leadership team of equals. And it only took a few months before I realized that means there's equally no leadership on the team. Nobody wanted to lead. Nobody wanted to take responsibility. Everybody was looking at everybody else. It got uncomfortable there for a minute, right? Well, if we're going to talk about this, not just the staff structure, and we all kind of have those experiences, we need to think about vision clarity, right? Jim, I want to start with a
Sure. Yeah,
baseline so everybody
absolutely.
knows what we're talking about. Like when we talk about the ways vision clarity shapes church staff structure or should shape church staff structure, what are we talking about when we say vision clarity? What is vision clarity? For us, simply those are components of what we would call clarity first vision. And anybody
Yep.
who's journeyed alongside Oxano knows these five things that
Right.
are frame, vision plan. You want to just kind of give us a
Right.
brief through of like what we mean with clarity first vision?
Yeah. Absolutely essential to staff structure, especially from a clarity side or from a visionary side, is to have that clarity first. 5 areas. We do it. It's our bread and butter. It's how we think. Mission, concise, compelling statement that shares what we're ultimately supposed to be doing. We call that the what of our ministry. What are we trying to do? Values. What are those shared convictions that guide our consistent decisions and ultimately shape our culture? We call it the why behind the what. It answers question why. It's the why behind that mission what, right? Strategy, that picture process that demonstrates how we accomplish the mission at the broadest level, right? How are we accomplishing that mission at the broadest level? Outcomes. What are the attributes or characteristics of an individual's life that demonstrate the disciple-making process? How do we know that life change is happening, right? It's the when are we being successful at accomplishing that mission? And then our vision, right? The idea of a vision plan, the idea that we know where God is taking us. It's where's God want us to go? And we break that down into the 1-4-1-4, the beyond the horizon, what's that furthest range out there for us, the background strategies, the mid-ground focus, and the foreground initiatives, which become this executable plan for vision. So at the end of the day, we've identified clarity of our identity, and we've identified what our vision is and our direction. We've got to have an organization that's built around that. So clarity first vision, it hinges, staff structure, it hinges on that clarity, no question.
Yeah, Jim, and I think that's a baseline of importance where we would say, listen, you have to have those things because clarity isn't everything, but clarity changes everything, right? We love that phrase.
Yeah.
We love that understanding. We know there's things that the pastors and leaders who are watching this right now, whether it's live or recorded, there are many other things you're dealing with in ministry, but everything you're dealing with in ministry comes back to clarity, including staff structure, Jim. So, clarity in this conversation changes how you structure staff, right?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And, when I think of this, I don't know about you guys, I love to think about metaphors, word pictures. I immediately go to the way that I see, say, birds or flock of birds flying. And Brian, have you ever seen the geese flying in that perfect V formation, right? And you see that point leader that just, no matter what move they make, you see the other birds just flowing. Have you ever, in a contrast way, come across a swarm, literally, of blackbirds in an area over trees or over a house? Have you ever seen that? It is mind-boggling at the almost chaos. And sometimes I think that that's the spectrum that we find ourselves as it relates to staff structure. So I pray this time today is about to help to bring clarity to that.
Well, if in kind of walking through the vision frame, vision plan, and this thing, there's anybody sitting out there who's like, oh my gosh, we can't even think about staff structure till that. We have a tool. Bob will drop it in the chat. It'll also be in the email follow up. Just a vision headwaters tool. Just maybe is a good self-evaluation for you and the team. It's a good opportunity for you to have a checkpoint there. So once again, that'll be in the chat. It'll be in the follow-up email. And the first question everybody always asks, yes, this will be recorded. Yes, you can look back over it. Yes, we'll send you notes, all those things as we kind of get into this. So there are really three primary ways vision clarity. And really these are three, what I would say, structures that clarity kind of jumps in there. And Jim, let's just kind of walk through them. And really you can call them models, you can call them structures, but the first one is the hierarchical model, right? A hierarchical model. And we'll just put the definition up here. It's an organizational structure with an obvious chain of command. Each hierarchy level reports to the one above it, creating a top-down management style. I would venture to say that's kind of what we're all most familiar with, right? It's team leadership. pastor, executive pastor, then department heads, maybe the different ministry areas, children, worship, students, youth, outreach, some of those things. Then, the staff that are a part of that, volunteers, and maybe if you're just a staff of one or two, you still probably have some organizational. I would say at each ministry area too, there's probably some sort of hierarchical organization of how we're staffing rooms or ministry. And I was kind of trying to think of some church examples, and honestly, just about every one of them, right, is a hierarchy.
Right.
You begin to think about it. Now, listen, sometimes we see people like putting it on its side, and we're not going to go top down. We're going to go side to side. Or then there's sometimes the very, which sometimes feels more spiritual, that it's a bottom up. We're going to put the senior pastor on the bottom, and then we're going to start, it's still hierarchical,
Doesn't
right?
change
It's
a thing.
still,
Doesn't
it's
change a
still
thing,
a
does
flow
it?
of leadership, even if you depict, or even if, I love this, I worked with Bayleaf years ago. Even if you put the teams in a circle and just kind of have the senior pastor out, there's still a hierarchical structure. You're still saying the senior pastor gives leadership. Now, what I love about this is they organized to their strategy components there. So that was very clear in how they talked about it. But it's still, at the end of the day, even in a circle, it's still a hierarchical structure there, right? And the key features are like there's clear lines of authority and responsibility. That's why this works. We know who reports to who. We know the flow of information. We know how authority works. Communication channels, again, movement is very clear on that. And, in most cases, there's a centralized decision making, whether that's you pull off the top two tiers or the bottom two tiers or the inner circle, whatever, however you depict it, there's centralized decision making in this. So, Jim, let's flip it back to the vision clarity piece of it. How does being clear in your vision, how does a clarity first vision really support a hierarchical model? Like, let's just talk through kind of how your vision can do that.
Yeah, great question. Great thing for us to pursue. When we think about the key elements that you just kind of outlined for the hierarchical model, there becomes kind of a strength for that, but there's also some challenges for it, right? And so let's talk about the strength, the support, how vision clarity supports it on the front end. We'll do that first, and we'll come back and say, okay, realistically, there's challenges here. First of all, goal alignment, right? Second, communication, movement, leadership, empowerment. What are we talking about with goal alignment? With goal alignment, we're saying, hey, vision clarity will help ensure that at all levels of the hierarchy are working toward the same objective. Doesn't matter whether you're at the top or whether you're at the bottom. We're all we're all working off of the same level of clarity. So therefore, there is a unified direction. Love that. That's powerful. It gets to move up and down. That clarity gets to move up in a very efficient way. Yeah. Along with that, communication movement, right? A clear vision will do what? It'll aid in effectively communicating goals and expectations from the top down. We're going to be able to ensure that everyone understands their role in achieving the mission, right? Because we have a very tight control, for lack of better words, of that. And, that allows for each team member to feel like they have a strong sense of purpose, to feel like they are absolutely moving toward the mission and then the ultimate vision of the church. And then the third one, leadership empowerment. When the vision is clear, when it's super clear, somebody who's a department head or other leaders, they are better equipped to make decisions aligned with the church's overall goals. In the hierarchical approach, if you decentralize, say, your workspace, you have great vision clarity in the hierarchical level. You have that ability not only just for the control of leadership empowerment, but for holding it accountable. So with good comes also challenges, right, Brian?
Well, Jim,
so
I would say this too, though. I would say this too, real quick, that leadership empowerment, when we think about kind of the vision plan and leading with a 1-4-1-4, as you mentioned at the top, like this is a way that you ensure that when we're focused on one thing for the next year, like there is accountability for that and that movement, that empowerment down chain. Like, there's a very much like, hey, team, we're focused on prayer this next year. Now I want all my ministry leaders to begin to think about how prayer is going to impact their year. And my ministry leaders are going to bring in their volunteers and talk about this. And so it really moves that 1 year focus through the whole organizational leadership.
right or wrong, however you want to say this, whether this gets interpreted the right way or the wrong way, when you push downstream the vision, right, that clarity goes downstream through the hierarchy or model, then they are able to align around it. There is an empowerment of those leaders to align around it in an upstream way. In other words, they are able to kind of figure out how their ministry is going to align around that, and that empowers them. That clarity will empower them to have another level of ownership with the vision.
Well, Jim, you hinted that there are challenges for this too,
Yeah.
right? There are some things that,
Yeah.
as common as it is, as frequent as it is, and maybe even logical seeming as it is, there are some real challenges to it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, bureaucracy, right? Limited collaboration, and then possible overload. Just some realities, quite frankly, in any organization, but certainly it has a tendency to be a little bit more personified in this hierarchical model. Bureaucracy, right? It becomes slow. Anywhere in the flow of the hierarchy, if it gets stopped, if vision is stuck, if vision is unclear, if vision's not being cast down, that the entire organization below it is going to be void of that. And so it becomes a very challenging situation. It limits collaboration. Oftentimes, and you kind of mentioned it and when you talked about some of the key features of it, it does become something that feels top down, right? It feels like even if vision is somewhat collaboratively developed, oftentimes it just feels like it's being pushed down and or assigned. So you have to work extra hard at making sure that ownership at all levels is embraced. And then there is a risk of overload. It's kind of like whenever you have a responsibility of a lot of people, a lot of things underneath you, you feel like everyone is coming to you to ask questions. It kind of ties to the bureaucracy, but it's that overload of everyone asking questions. Everyone, me being in the point of hierarchy to where if I don't make the decision, the organization's not going to be able to move forward. And so that model, there's some things that'll work against vision clarity. I mean, it really will. Those three characteristics will put it'll put pressure on you to have the clarity, and it will put a lot of pressure on you to maintain alignment with the clarity with the team.
I think the fear too is it shifts your people into managerial mindsets versus a leadership mindset. It moves us away from
absolutely.
11 and 12 where we're equipping, and instead we're just telling or delegating versus developing and empowering. And so sometimes that could be a risk of that, even though it is clear and some of those things. And once again, no matter how you picture it, if you're using boxes that are connected by lines and they're vertical or horizontal or bottom up, it still is that often that hierarchical piece of that. Let's shift gears.
Oh, agreed.
That first structure, the first one is hierarchical. The second one is team of teams. And so this one is a little bit different when you begin to think about this. Some of us may have heard about it, but it's really a decentralization of structure that maybe has some flexibility where teams operate semi-independently, right? It's somewhat independent of each other, yet they're very focused on and connected by this joint mission, this joint calling. I think there's, maybe autonomous teams that are multiply, like the worship teams over here, the outreach team, the discipleship team, and they collaborate and coordinate regularly, but they're still like, maybe more independent or kind of semi-autonomous. We can see that sometimes pop up where there's kind of almost SWAT teams or hit teams. This church really organized out in Colorado, organized around these teams, but then had the central operational, the directional team in the middle, the operational teams on the outside. And sometimes those players were interdispersed, right? That means if you're creative, you're not just creative in one area, you may be creative on another team over here and another team over here. And so there's kind of this, we're a team of teams, maybe structured with some independence on that. There is a high emphasis in the team of teams model of, collaboration, cross-team communication that almost ratchets up a little bit more because it's not naturally flowing like it is in the hierarchical piece of that, right? There's the one of the benefits though is you're agile and adaptable. Like those teams can react and respond to what's going on around them without having to wait and ask a question upstream, some of those things. This is why I think General Stanley McChrystal, the famous general, wrote the book Team of Teams, and why a lot of our, military special forces are structured like this, because although you have good training and we have a centrally focused mission, much of that is reacting and responding to what's actually happening right there, right? So equipping a team to be responsive without having to go, hey, let me pause on that. Let me go ask my direct report to ask their direct report if we can make this. And then there's shared leadership and decision making. Like, hey, listen, there's multiple leaders, multiple sharing. We move a little closer to that Ephesians 4. Not that there's one better than the other or more biblical than the other, but we can see, hey, we're really, releasing some leadership to more people in a functional like this. Come back around to that question, Jim. How does Vision Clarity support the Team of Teams model when we begin to think about it through the lens of Clarity First?
Yeah, you're almost going to hear a redundant comment from me here that I want to reinforce. Vision Clarity is critical for every one of these models. It's critical for every staff structure that we would put up here. I do think that there are certain degrees of intensity that we have to think about that has a greater need for some models. And when you start to enter in some level of very, in a few moments, complexity or something that's different, we have to raise that level of vision clarity. Like, it has to almost be even, more intent, and to, tie with your the example, we have to be more militant about it, or we're going to begin to see things begin to fall apart. And I think we're susceptible to silos. We'll get to that in a minute. So the Team of Teams, shared direction, coordinated collaboration, empowered accountability. So Vision Clarity in the Team of Teams model, right, means that despite their autonomy, they have to see the absolute, no question about it, what is our shared direction? What is our mission? What is the objective for that team? What are the goals? What are we trying? And if they take that eye off of that autonomy could go sideways, right? It could go out in left field on its own. Coordinated collaboration, clear vision facilitates better coordination and collaboration between the teams, helping align their efforts and that avoid those silos. Meaning we've got to work really hard within the team and within the Team of Teams for that collaboration to be fostered. Otherwise, if without the collaboration, it's going to lead to isolation of the team. You can't have that happen. We're back to some of the problems that we have in any organization, right, which is that silo. Empowered accountability, where clear vision empowers the team leaders to make decisions. And we kind of shared this in the last one. Remember, there's several of these you're going to see kind of feed throughout. Well, it helping them make decisions means that they are we are confident that they are aligned with our mission, or the church's mission, and we're going to help hold them accountable for their outcomes in this Team of Teams environment. So Vision Clarity supports it at a deep level, absolutely 100%.
And Jim, in the definition you read earlier of values, those shared convictions guide consistent decisions. Clear, well-written values that are shared allow those teams to make decisions independently or somewhat autonomously, yet in unison with this overarching calling we have. And so I think that's why we kind of tend to move away from just like one word values. We have a value of, responsibility. Okay, what does that actually mean? It's hard for me to make a decision, right? Some of those things. And so really pressing into good values that are well-defined, demonstrated clearly, anchored in Scripture, those things will help a Team of Teams. Most Team of Teams model we see, faltering and failing. It's because they have not aligned themselves on the values that guide or the outcomes that say, hey, this is what success actually looks like. But Jim, there's other challenges too, right? There are some challenges in actually operationalizing the Team of Teams model.
Yeah, for sure. And some of them are pretty quickly obvious, right? The specialized roles. If we're not careful, we can duplicate efforts, we can duplicate responsibilities, activities, all those things could be duplicated. So we have to make sure that we are being super clear with specifying the roles so that it's avoiding duplication. We've got to make sure that we are optimizing our efforts, meaning we've got to maintain that consistent vision and values across the teams, so that not only so that the teams of teams, I want you to think of sometimes a team of teams as being a series of gears, right?
Yeah.
We want those teams, as they maybe independently move, to be moving in coordination with other gears. We don't want a team to lock up the organization, right? And so optimizing efforts, equalizing resources, balancing the resources among the teams can be a challenge at times. We have that in all of our ministries, but we want to be able to ensure that equitable support. We want to be able to avoid the competition, right? So we got to work a little bit hard. You're building team, which is really exciting. You've got kind of a new model, but you can step into a little bit of an unhealthy competitive kind of spirit if you're not careful. So being able to equalize those resources is a big thing.
I think especially if we're celebrating some work that one team is doing consistently and kind of giving focus, then human nature kicks in. It's like, well, that team, we got to do what that team's doing, and all those things.
Yeah,
so,
right.
It really does.
Right.
It really does take a kind of a really even a deeper, like, this is not a leader who can go, well, I'm going to set up team of teams, that way I don't have to have as much influence or input. Right? No, you actually have to be more attuned to what's going on between the teams and more of a leader in the vision so that everybody stays dialed in. I think the other thing is team of teams can also be temporary, right? We could, it doesn't have to be our staff structure in totality. We could set up something for an event or a special season or something like that. Sometimes campaign seasons model a little bit of a team of teams where we're distributing, or Jim, even with foreground initiatives in a 1-4-1-4 vision plan,
right?
You see those cross-functional teams as team of teams. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. You could see a temporary, as you just said, team of teams that you establish, but you could also see a team of teams, as kind of you've alluded to, in maybe one area, and some of the other areas may have a different model. And then, of course, you could try, we could move our entire ministry to a team of teams. So there's a lot of versatility. And quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, Brian, I think there's a lot of excitement around team of teams. And if you have a team, if you have a staff that you are trying to kind of take to another level, I want to encourage you to kind of look into that team of teams model, because you can get a lot of synergy. Therefore, you can have a lot of movement very quickly.
And I think, once again, the ability to develop leaders, is maybe a little bit, better, because there's less, kind of managerial moments in that. So that's team of teams. We'll come back around. I'm sure there's some questions that are emerging in this. Let's go to kind of a third structure real quick. The matrix structure. Okay. Now this one is not, Neo in the movies. This is really kind of thinking about a matrix, which really combines a little bit of both worlds. And we kind of alluded to it before. There's a hierarchical piece of this and team of teams where staff and leaders report to multiple leaders or departments based on different projects or functions. So this gets, this gets a little tricky. A lot of times, staff have dual reporting lines, like to a functional manager, maybe worship and outreach over here, or a project or program manager over here. A lot of times we see this in multi-site settings where there are campuses, especially if you've got teams. Think about a team of teams, but now we've got a team across town or in a totally different location where that collaboration is even harder. Then we begin to think in terms of a matrix where we've got some support functions, we've got some directional functions, we've got some campus functions, yet we have to be kind of working in two directions in this. Once again, you can depict it in different ways, but usually there's a flow vertically, a flow horizontally of, hey, we're doing something over here within a ministry or campus, but then there's an overarching directional piece of that in there. When we do multi-site coaching, we talk about the matrix as a kind of a necessary staffing where horizontally the ministry leadership provides, vision, direction, training, resources, but then at campus levels, campus leadership provides implementation in that local context. So there's multiple campuses and multiple parts of town that have different contexts. And so you do that. It also allows you to expand, right? It allows you to add, those things, add another campus, add another team. That's the reason we would go to the matrix there. But once again, there's dual or multiple lines of reporting. So you have to have leaders who have enough leadership EQ to be able to understand that they, work, in two different directions, or maybe serve in one area, work in the ministry in one area and work on the ministry in another area, which can be done. And there's both functional and project-based responsibility. So there may be seasonal or temporary things, but yes, this isn't a matrix thing. This also really allows for a flexible allocation of resources, kind of the most flexibility in saying, hey, we can multiply our efforts. We can have people who serve on a team here, but give direction to a team there. Once again, it's more of a hybrid of both of what we've looked at before. But Jim, come back to the vision clarity component of this. How does vision clarity support this matrix model when you look at it right there?
And Brian, I think the default thinking for many of us on the matrix model is that it is most prevalent or predominant in the multi-site arena, right? It's not uncommon. I do find that it could also be within a ministry. You could have a ministry within an organization that moves toward a matrix model. You could, for example, we have a church at Exano here that has a church planting system, a vision for church planting. And while the rest of their church is hierarchical, they've created a matrix model for that church planting. None of those churches are going to be multi-sites, but those churches that are being planted are very dependent upon the church that is planting them for a short season to help them launch. And so that matrix model was in place. So I think it's important for all of us to not think of a matrix model as only for a multi-site strategy. There's a lot of ways that can be used, and vision clarity to support that matrix model is absolutely imperative, right? We've got to stay, once again, with those consistent priorities. Vision clarity is going to help us to prioritize the task, ensuring all of our efforts are aligned with, once again, what? Our church's mission. What's the vision that we're trying to accomplish? What are we trying to achieve? Those consistent priorities will help keep the matrix model honest, right? It'll help keep it pure. It'll help keep it headed in the right direction. You go off mission by 1 degree as an organization, and all of a sudden you've got chaos within your matrix, right? And so super important. Conflict resolution, clear vision serves as a reference point for resolving conflicts between different managers and departments. And once again, you're going to come back in a moment, and you're going to kind of see one of the challenges with it is that it's very common for a matrix model, someone who's in a matrix model, to have a bit of uncertainty as to who their direct report is or who they're ultimately answering to. And it is super important that we be clear with those roles. And as a part of being clear with those roles, this vision clarity is going to help bring conflict resolution as it relates to being between different managers or departments. And then the last one is consolidated efforts. It ensures that both the functional and project-based initiatives that we're pursuing are integrated and contributed. Watch this, throughout everything, throughout all the lines. Super important because this idea of a matrix model means that we are going to take the critical aspect of our vision clarity, and it's going to flow both vertically and horizontally through this. Excuse me, let me get that right. I kind of did that wrong, right? Vertically and horizontally through our matrix. And those goals need to go all, through every element. But there are challenges.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, Jim, that in understanding that, you've got to ask, is this a DNA question or is this an application question? Is this, when you have the multiple direct reports, you have to understand which direction the vision is flowing from in that, in there. So
absolutely. Is this about the uniqueness of this particular campus or ministry, or is this about something related to the bigger picture of vision? So the one word for challenges and it really
Yeah.
is one word, and we're going to kind of give a couple things to it, is the word complexity, right?
Yeah.
The reporting complexity we just mentioned, it can create confusion because you're probably going to have you will have some type of dual reporting lines and accountability. And so you got to be super clear on that and know who the direct report is. Otherwise, you do step into a great deal, and I will say this, a great deal, not just confusion, but frustration. Because confusion leads to frustration of a team member, and it wouldn't take much from that frustration to move for that person to become saying, hey, listen, I'm out. Like the frustration is unbearable for me, and I'm going to step down. Another complexity is communication. Can you imagine having people, if you don't have the clarity in place, can you imagine having mixed messages coming from at least two different sides, if not more, as a part of the matrix? So you got to make sure that that you have the shared language. And if you don't, you're entering into some communication complexity. Things get misconstrued, things get interpreted the wrong way. Priority complexity, right? Who gets called on first? Like, the priorities are out there, everything seems like it's important, and all of a sudden there's this tension between a functional or a project a functional manager or a project manager. Let's take that more. Let's apply that even more. There's a priority from a campus pastor that's maybe different from a kids pastor, a centralized kids pastor leader, right? Yeah. And when those priorities are different, that complexity becomes a huge issue for the team member. And then last, and kind of ties with it as well, is management complexity, right? That it requires this skilled management of department heads and leaders to be able to balance the resources, to maintain clarity, to have great communication, right? To have great collaboration. And so the management complexity is there too, which means you have to make sure it is a right fit for the people who are leading in a matrix structure.
Yeah. Despite the complexity, there's still great value in it.
Absolutely.
To multiply. And it doesn't have to be just a as you said, multi-church model or a mega church model. I can think of a small community church that has a daycare, and there's a little bit of a matrix structure to that, because there's visionary things that are for the church as a whole, but there's application through the lens of this ministry. And so, you can begin to do this. The key is, I think, Jim, I'll go out on a limb here, and say that the more you get from hierarchical to team of teams to matrix, the more clear your vision has to be, right? In the hierarchical model, the clarity must permeate the organization the further you get from the hierarchical toward the matrix, or else, as we've said, these challenges, would just be there. Little summary table here.
Brian, technically, and your table is showing that, technically there is a move from simplicity to complexity in this. And so, or maybe not simplicity, I'm not saying hierarchical simple, but of the three, it's more simple, right? And so the further you move down that complexity continuum, the more it demands clarity, or you're going to have an issue.
And the greater chance you have to develop future leaders, generational leaders, the greater chance you have to be able to accomplish something that's beyond the span of control of just one or two core leaders. So, I mean, there's advantages to that, even though it is complex, right? And so, we don't have to avoid those things because they're complex. We can embrace them when we know what, again, the identity, direction, some of those things as a piece of that. Jim, I just kind of jump in right here with just like, no matter how you're doing this, for us as leaders, the way we help churches do move to some of these models or express some of these models or even realize the need for taking a step into that comes through a vision planning process, right? That's for me, at least.
Absolutely.
We have these kind of conversations and we're talking about accomplishing, God's better future. I know that, strategy plays a role in that. I know there's some other pieces of it, but really when you think about God's better future, the 1414 that we're called to, a lot of these questions come up and are answered through this process because once again, we're aligned on what God has called us to do.
Brian, I think that probably one of the fastest growing areas of engagement for us at Exano through our vision planning process is when a church, elder team, leadership, pastor says, as a part of this vision planning process, we would like to look at our staff structure. We would like to look at our staff organization. I would say in the last 3 years, the percentage of churches that have walked into a relationship for vision planning have a hope and desire for their staff structure and organization to be better aligned.
Yeah. And we have to reorient that to the vision is not a better staff structure. The vision is what God is calling us to, that this staff structure will facilitate in a better way.
And I'm not saying that their intention is that the vision for that to be the vision. I'm saying that they want, as a part of a vision planning process, to help them figure out the staff structure piece to it. So absolutely.
I love it. Jim, we asked some questions in the registration, and I love this because we already have some questions that have been populated, and I see a question or two in the chat. Continue to kind of put those in if we'll get to those. But, I think there's a few that it seems like we already answered, right? How do we move away from high management system? What's the difference between the different models? Why would a leader opt for one or the other? More of the team of teams model. I'm pretty sure we call it something different. Anything else to add when you see these questions that kind of were asked even ahead of this webinar today?
Well, Brian, first of all, thanks for the chart, the summary chart, because that does let me as a leader, and I know many leaders on here having a short amount of time to be able to look at that chart, that quick glance. I can begin to assess, what my model is currently, and then also is there a different model we want to pursue. One of the questions that we were faced with, Brian, it kind of started talking about change management. Mm-hmm. And so we had several questions that hit in that area. I jotted down 5 keywords, just jotted this down if I'm a leader. And as I have led teams through this type, I wrote down these 5 words: assess, define, communicate, implement, and foster. Now, what are we doing? We're assessing our current structure and needs. You've given us a great example for that, right? Of how we transition from a traditional staffing structure to maybe a more flexible, fluid structure without, I love the question, without crashing the train, right? Without blowing it up, right? So you assess your current situation, staff structure needs, you define the roles and the responsibilities, right? You redefine those roles and responsibilities. You define those, you go through a reorganization as a part of that defining. You communicate the change very clearly, not just to the staff, but to the church. You begin to implement strategically, which may mean for some churches implementing it, at a slower pace. Some churches have the ability to be more agile and they can implement that change from a traditional staffing structure to a more flexible. They can maybe do that quicker. Either way, you have to implement strategically. And then ultimately foster collaboration and communication. You got to have a great collaboration and communication evaluation for how this is doing. So I wrote down 5 words for that: assess, define, communicate, implement, and foster whenever it comes to leading the organization through that change.
What about that blending of hierarchical, that second question there, blending hierarchical and team of teams? What do you there? In change management?
Yep. Well, here's what I would say. The executive level, the top level of a church team should have ownership of a team. So, for example, if you're going to go to a team that blend the hierarchical to the team of teams, I would make sure each person in the executive level oversees a team, if that's making sense. It's okay for them to build a team of teams, but you're more than likely going to have that in this question. You're going to have a hierarchical model at the top, a lead pastor or a senior pastor, 4 to 5 executive level ministers, pastors, whatever, and they have a team of teams underneath them. Ultimately, it's still kind of hierarchical at the top, but you have this team of teams as it relates to the management of the church or the direction of the church. Here's what's to be clear: unless you're talking about a plurality of leadership, that is still a very hierarchical structure at the top level.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the last question too is, how do we begin to move that? If we have a traditional
Yeah,
structure,
yeah,
or, how do we even let mission and vision drive our
yeah,
structure? You know, you want to speak to
yeah.
that for a minute, a couple
Well, I
handles?
kind of feel like that's I kind of feel like that's the whole, kind of the purpose of this webinar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially my first reply to that is it begins with what? And when it says, how do we go from one structure to a new model that's mission vision driven? Well, you got to clarify the mission and vision.
Yeah.
You're like, don't even attempt it without that clarification, right? Which
Yeah.
means engaging stakeholders and involving everyone as a part of that, aligning around the organizational values, right? Creating a culture of accountability around that mission and vision. Like whenever I see organizations go from one structure, one model to another, void of the clarity, what I see within hours of that change, not days, not weeks, not months, but hours, is I see frustration and confusion.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they don't keep. So you have to identify that have the clarity of mission and vision, and engaging the people, aligning around them, holding accountable, celebrating the stories, right, of a new model and how it's helping us achieve our mission and vision, right?
I hear you saying it's not
it's a
about
great
that
question.
leader, not about that leader having clarity. It's about the organization having clarity, right? And so, once again,
Yeah.
there's a difference in those things. In a very cheeky way, I would
Yeah.
answer that last question here. Hey, that's what we do. That's how we help.
Right, right.
This is literally kind of the answer is, yeah, you can move to that.
Yeah.
It takes a bigger picture of vision, and you better be anchoring it in
For sure.
we call, not just in an organizational moving moment. A couple of deeper questions, that have come in ahead of time. Is there a comprehensive needs assessment guide to determine staffing to meet our church purpose mission regarding budget? Like, is there something we can do, Jim, to just answer a few questions and find out what we need to do?
Well, here's what I would say. In an extremely formal way, the answer from us is no. We don't have a comprehensive needs assessment guide. We're going to say there's a process we're going to walk you through to help you to answer questions, right, in a very collaborative way to determine, to do that, assessing where we are, articulating what we want to move to, aligning around it, and then how to advance it, right? So the answer is no from an assessment side, but from a process side, the answer is yes.
Yeah. And then,
and go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say the other question, I guess it came up beforehand that was kind of felt pretty relevant, was best practices to maintain flexibility while retaining accountability. Is there, once again, it's a best practice kind of question. Is there any, kind of standardized pieces to that? I would answer the question from the jump of just kind of remembering that, we want to think in terms of a PT boat versus a battleship. Like, what is, how do we, and manage change in that way, like, and think about the church overall as a battleship. And we can't try to change things too fast, yet within our teams, we could be, kind of quick response, some of those things. Think about this in terms of a process, not a pivot. When you think about this movement from one model to the other, it's a process, not a pivot. We're just not going to flip a switch overnight because we put something on a spreadsheet. Any other thoughts, Jim, in this before I pull up a couple questions that are coming in live?
Well, if I could make a nod to next month, to September's webinar that we'll be doing, I feel like there's some things that we're going to be able to drill down a little bit more on this when it talks about the flexibility and accountability with the staff, because that'll be a little bit more directed toward that. But initially, here's what I would say, is that I would say that some of those best practices that you have to build in systems and processes, if you allow me to be technical here, systems and processes of accountability, of celebration, of that helping them, of flexibility, so that it doesn't feel rigid, so that it doesn't feel like it's something that's being forced upon them. And so, jump in with us a month, and I think we'll be able to answer that one a little bit further.
Jacob has asked a couple questions live in real time, and the first one real quick. I
Hey,
don't
Jacob.
think, Jacob, that I like your purple shirt. I don't think that strategy is necessarily the only defining factor, either horizontally on vertically or campuses. But I do think you see more often, because strategy is how we accomplish our mission at the broadest level, and it's how we kind of align the vehicles and venues of mission accomplishment in the organization. That does become one of them. But I could see, in certain situations, that other programs or ministries, or other ministry groups that could dictate that. And again, once again, it's not necessarily campuses. It may be, within an effort, we're going to do maybe a Lenten season. We might have a matrix idea there that, for this season, a Lenten season, we're going to kind of do that as a temporal thing. And you're right. A lot of times the hierarchical, is that I think there's books that have been written on each of these models, right? There's books that have been written on change management. So as we come to kind of the end of our webinar time right now, we could spend a whole year of webinars just talking about team of teams and some of those things. What we're trying to do today is just kind of saying, hey, listen, we want to paint the bigger picture. The question Joey put up there is different models for in-person versus remote work. I think you naturally begin to think, intuitively say, well, team of teams may be better in remote work because, once again, we're more displaced and we're more agile and able to react and respond. But yet the power of a hierarchical model where there's a direct flow of communication keeps us connected in a way that we might not from team to team. I think you have to weigh in, how clear is your vision? Jim, I'll toss to you on this, but I would say
yeah.
The more clear your vision is, the better able you're going to be to be able to employ other types of structures with your leadership. If it's not clear and shared collaboratively, then hierarchical is really, one of the most effective ways from that sense.
Yeah, and what I would continue to push on, as I've said for years now on the remote work thing, especially as it relates to structure, is it is all about trust and accountability.
Yeah.
Do you have trust that they share the values? Do you have trust that they're competent in their skill set? Do you have trust that they have a strong work ethic, right?
Yeah.
Do you have trust that they're going to make? There's a phrase I actually sent this to a pastor the other day, and actually have shared this in multiple ways in the last 2 to 3 days. There's a phrase I'll have. I want somebody on my team, hear me out, that can make a decision better than I can. Let that sink in for a second, right? The more decentralized you are, the more important that statement is.
Yeah.
Because in a way, I don't have sometimes the control or that ability, especially if I'm not in a hierarchical structure. And so I want them to be able to make decisions better than I can make, which is a trust issue, which comes through accountability. And for me, it doesn't matter what the structure is. We got to kind of have that fostered. I can see pros and cons for every model out there in a remote structure.
Well, Jim, you alluded to it. We're kind of in the middle. We decided this fall to kind of do a whole series of Clarity First staffing.
Yeah.
Of just, how do we lead staff meetings, which will be the second one again in September on the 26th. October, we're going to bring in Greg Gibbs to talk about visionary budgeting strategies for staffing ahead of growth. We see this question a lot right now. How do we think with a visionary lens for potentially staffing ahead of growth? And I think we're going to get into right sizing staffing from a vision standpoint too, of how does that work? So there's a compelling piece of that as we get into that too there. I love the fact that we're opening up some bigger doors of this. You'll get an email follow-up from us. You'll get the ability to connect, ask more questions. We're around offline, online. I would say this, if you're looking to say, hey, how can we get better in this? Just reach out, set up a phone conversation. Jim or I, one of our team, we'd love to just kind of jump in there with you and really even and lean in a little bit more. Jim, any last thoughts as we kind of close out the time today?
Yeah, no, I really just kind of almost back where we started, right? The phrase clarity isn't everything, but clarity changes everything. Staff structures aren't everything, but clarity first staff structures can change everything.
Yeah.
It can move you from that feeling that where Jethro says to Moses, you can't do this alone. You can't do this alone.
Yeah.
Right. And so, just as a leader, and many of you are coaching teams, just help these teams get healthy, help them have that clarity first.
Thanks for jumping in, guys. God bless you. Have a great rest of your day. We look forward to seeing clarity emerge everywhere.